Well, hello friends, I am out in the garden today. I am enjoying a beautiful sunny day. It all at once shot from really cool spring weather to hot summer weather. We're at 86 degrees Fahrenheit today and we'll probably yo-yo back and forth. It is still early spring, really, when you're looking at the calendar, but guess what? It can go back and forth between spring and summer. So today is all about starting some warmer season chores, doing some plantings. I'm gonna be working in the perennial bed behind me. This perennial bed is barren in the winter other than the boxwood, but it's slowly starting to spring to life. I have a few plants to add into it. I kind of just add into it every year. It has a cottage perennial bed feel of kind of this haphazard, I like to call it controlled chaos. It's a little chaotic sometimes in there, but it has a rhyme or reason to it, and I'll go over that just for some blooms at different times and things like that. And then we're gonna head out to the vegetable gardens and we are gonna start planting some warm season vegetables. We are hitting where it is 60 degrees as a low at night Fahrenheit, and that means it is plenty warm enough and we have no frost. The outlook is looking good, and I'm gonna plant my tomatoes and my peppers, go over how I prepare my raised beds for those and how I really get ready, because it's all in that beginning that really helps us start to have a good year and outlook ahead. So come garden with me. That to me is the best part, is when we can garden together. And let's go start with this perennial garden. So this perennial bed spans the back of my garden shed, I call it. My house is obviously up here, and this is a low bed that really kind of creates a nice wall against my backyard. My whole backyard has a more formal feel with a fire pit area right there in that big kettle. I have fires and I sit out there on that gravel patio when I have friends over. And so this bed, this beautiful perennial bed, has lots of various things, and you're gonna see purple pots. Those are what we're gonna plant today. And what we have within this bed are lots of herbaceous peonies. We have Ito peonies, tree peonies. Here's a tree peony right there, which is one of my favorite. They have huge blooms. And then we have lots of allium, we have lots of betony, we have hardy geraniums, and all of those are gonna bloom a little later. But what I wanna plant some more of right now is some fill-in. So this spring, I really kind of redid this bed. And when I say controlled chaos, like I did earlier, what I mean is I like groupings of plants that repeat as you go down a long line, so it feels like they go together. So here I have 5 Millennium allium, then I have 5 humulobetony, and then I have 5 Millennium allium, and I repeat that pattern, and within that then I start doing some variations at different things. I have some beautiful geum that I'll show you here in a little bit that blooms super early. We're also gonna plant some Caradonna salvia, one of my favorites because it's so beautiful and upright. I have some fern leaf peonies that are just coming. I've split a lot of them, so they're smaller this year, but they're gonna be beautiful. And so there's all different types of things. There's lilies that will bloom later. I have some big roses on the trellis that will bloom, but let's start with planting some salvia. Now, whenever I'm planting something, my big thing is making sure the health of the soil is gonna be as good as it can be. Just like us, we want our food we eat to be healthy. We want it to nourish our bodies. It's just like what we want to do for the plants and the soil there. Now, I live in zone 5B in southeast Iowa, which means I by nature have nice, rich, black soil that drains well, holds on to moisture well when needed. But that doesn't always mean it has all the nutrients it needs. So definitely when I'm working with planting anything, I will add a beautiful booster to help the roots go. And I'll even add sometimes, if it's a flower, something that blooms, a fertilizer that has some more phosphorus in it to help that bloom. Anything with a higher amount of phosphorus is really gonna help blooms, and I like to do that always in an organic way. So I'm gonna show you the 2 items I'm using to do that and show you how the plants I'm planting are small starts. So this is spring. You know, I have large gardens and I like to not have to spend more money than I need to. So in the spring, you can get perennials in small pots. And I know it's easier to think, well, I want a huge pot so I can just plant as much as I want and have it look huge right away. Not always the case. So in the spring, you can get small perennials usually. This is $6 at various local nurseries get these in, and they only have them in the spring, and then they start getting in gallon size. Well, the gallon size ones usually range from $16 to $25 a piece. Well, this same little plant by the end of summer is gonna be massive. So what this plant is as it grows is this back here. It's a beautiful, larger, and it really stands upright for salvia. Some salvias have a tendency to lay over. I really like the Caradonna, which you can see right here, because it kind of stays that nice, upright, large, long flowers, and it to me is just super simple. What I like about it is it's a great fill-in. So you can't see it yet because this bed is just waking up and I have my drip line in it. But you have this betony, all these will get nice large mounds. You have a lot of hardy geranium in front that kind of spills over the edge of the bed. But then I like things back behind that once the peonies stop, because they come from the ground, so eventually they get nice and big, but eventually they stop blooming. So then I want something like this beautiful salvia to really take over. So that's where I'm gonna kind of fill in some areas where I don't have anything going. And right here is one of them. So you can see I have gorgeous soil right here. And that's of course always a good first step, is having this beautiful soil. And I have my trowel and I can easily dig a hole. So the thing is, you know, if you have a lot of clay when you're digging, you have rocks, whatever it is, no matter where you live in the country, we're all gonna deal with different things. Always amend if you feel like you have soil that isn't nice and rich. So you can add your compost, add a really good compost that's organic, and with that, up to 50%, as in take 50% of the soil you dug out away and put in about 50% compost. That's really gonna help the plant. But into this hole, what I'm gonna do today is do some flower tone, and of course do biotone. So both of these are gonna work together, which you can see right here, blossom or bloom booster, which is super important. And then this is more of a starter food for the perennial itself. I always think it's important to also talk about when we're going into fertilizers, going into things and adding into the soil. You know, for years, when we grew up, we weren't always doing that. We weren't amending the soil. We weren't adding tons of fertilizers. Sometimes we'd throw something in maybe when we watered and hope for the best. But over the years, I've really learned that the health of the soil, if you can enrich the health of the soil over the life of your garden, it's always in return gonna give you better blooms, healthier plants. And what healthier plants do, they can fight off disease better, they can fight off pests better, and they can fight to live in the garden better. And that's what's important here, is to create a healthy living plant that can fend for itself, that can take on and tolerate different things that come through. So I'm gonna put both these in the hole and then we're just gonna start planting. The one thing too I always want to make sure I talk about is these do have, I guess, a smell. So a few of you have said you started using different products like this, because I love the Espoma products when I'm planting, and that you noticed that there was a smell to them. So I'm gonna admit, I live in Iowa. I live around a lot of animals, a lot of livestock in accompanying or close by farms. I'm used to various smells that I honestly don't even think about it that much, but it does. It has a very, you know, earthy, outdoorsy smell. It has even some, I wouldn't call it manure at all, but it definitely has a smell. And that's just normal. And to me, it's one of those things that eventually you get used to because you know it helps the plant so much. So I'm opening up the roots just a little bit on that root ball, nothing too major. And I'm just setting it in that hole. So usually you want to say what? You dig a hole about 2 times the size of the plant. I don't worry too much about that. I just make sure it nicely fits in there and then it's set. Now, at first this kind of looks a little boring. What I like to do on a plant like this is actually trim it back. So I will trim off its blooms that are starting to stress the plant just a little bit. I'll just nip those back. And then what it does is it allows the plant to focus on its roots at first, focus on growing, and then send out new blooms later once it's really going. Because you can see over here, on this more established one, if you look close at it, those are the blooms already coming out on it. So it won't bloom for a little bit yet, but it's already starting to set them. So all the way down here, eventually we'll have these little pockets of that purple, beautiful salvia. So within a few minutes, I have all of the salvia planted. And I know always at first it seems like it's haphazard, but what I love about this bed is as the season moves on, as we get into late May, all at once it explodes and it feels like it makes so much sense. My thing has always been over the years, I worry so much about a bed at different times of the year, before things are really growing or in the fall when they're starting to not look good. And I toil about it and think about it. But then as it gets into the growing season, gets into the beauty of the year, it always comes together. And I think that's so much of gardening. If you plant things you love, if you work on it and kind of figure out the areas that you love the color and how you love to group them, it always comes together. So now I want to plant one of my other favorite spring blooming plants, and I think everyone needs this. So here towards the end of the bed, I'm gonna plant some more of this beautiful geum. So this is one of my favorite flowers. It blooms early spring. It blooms in lives in zones 5 to 8. So I'm in zone 5B, so this is perfect for my zone, but all the way down to 8, this works really well. And why I like it is it's a delicate early bloomer. So if you look at this is a different variety, but look how beautiful that delicate bloom is. And as the mounds get bigger, they just get more and more blooms on them. So to me, it's one of those simple things that can really just make a garden stand out in the beginning. And I find it's a little bit more unique. It's actually an older plant, but not as many people have it. And so I think it's kind of one of those more really fun ones that when you have people over, it's usually one that people notice because it's such an early bloom and it's a unique bloom. You can find some nice colors. This is more of a red one, which I've had this one in the past, and I think I transplanted it somewhere else, but it's such a pretty bright color red, which you can see here, it's soon gonna bloom. And it really stands out amongst all the green before the rest of the blooms come. So now that this bed is a little bit more put together, I'm gonna move on to the vegetable garden and really start going for those wonderful summer vegetables we all look forward to. So we're down in my vegetable garden now, which honestly is right beside, there's the perennial bed I was just working in. Now we're in the vegetable raised beds. So the 4 beds behind me are my main 4 vegetable beds. I have 2 more that have perennial items, rhubarb, asparagus, and perennial onions, and then I put my garlic in that. But the ones behind me are ones that I rotate year to year, just to ward off any soil-borne disease, switch things up. It's always good to rotate your crops if you can, and if you have space to do that. So these are raised beds. They're just about a foot high. I have a tutorial on my website, wyseguide.com, where you can see how I made these and how I put them together. Mine are 24 foot long by 4 foot wide. They don't need to be that long. This was kind of just the outline I had for my garden at the time, so it worked well. But if it was a little shorter, my mom's are more 10 foot when I made them, long and 4 foot wide. 4 foot width is perfect because you can reach across it from both sides. You don't want to compact your soil. And also with a raised bed, the key is to never till your soil. It's no till. A raised bed is going to have the best soil when you cannot till it, because what you're going to do is allow the soil to create its best ecosystems, microorganisms that are all going to live within that soil. Tilling it actually breaks up those organisms. Tilling it also brings thousands of weed seeds to the light, to the air, to water where they grow. So the reason with in-ground beds, the reason you're never going to get ahead of weeds, other than by mulching, of course, is because you're bringing those seeds up every time you till. So in my raised beds, honestly, I don't get an overabundance of weeds. If I do, I just pluck 1 or 2 out every so often, but it's no big deal. But I do prepare the beds, and I have a little bit different thing I did this year, so I kind of want to go over that. So in these beds, this year, this is the tomato bed. I know I'm going to get questions on what is with all these red terracotta tiles. So these are old field tiles, meaning in all the fields that are farmed around our farms, our properties, our family farm, at one point in history, back when you started tiling fields to get water out of the field quicker so your crops could do better, you used heavy red tiles. You don't use these anymore. You use large corrugated plastic tile now in fields. And so sometimes these get dug up, and we save them because they're great to protect our plants. You know, I live in a very open area, so sometimes the wind just barrels through, and you can see even today, it looks almost like weather in the sky. It's getting dark over here, so we could get wind later on. And so when I plant something new like my tomatoes, I usually put this around them just to make sure they're safe until they get more sturdy and more strong to live out on their own. So what I have here are my 2 beds. Now this bed that has my tomatoes, last fall I put a thick layer of a nice leaf mulch on that I picked up off my yard. So it's just organic leaves. It's just all my yard waste from the fall, untreated. And I put this on because tomatoes like a nice layer of mulch between the soil and their leaves or their stems, because soil-borne diseases are usually spread quicker from the soil splashing up on the plant, from watering, from rain, whatever it is. So this will act as a layer between those. This bed, otherwise, I'm leaving unamended, but what I will do is when I plant, each tomato plant will amend slightly, I'll show you. But over here, what I have is the bed all my hot peppers are gonna go in. And what you can see is I've started putting out a little bit more soil. I did put some leaves down last fall. It's a very thin layer, but I wanted to build up the soil a little bit. You can see it's starting to settle. So I'm adding in some raised bed mix from Espoma. I use this a few times now, and I really like it because it has a beautiful mixture to it. It's very nice and airy. It really allows the water to drain through well and roots to get through well. And then I'm adding a little bit of compost on that too. So I have everything kind of back here on the back of my gator. I have my plants that I started from seed. This is the raised bed mix I will use. If your local garden center does not carry it, ask them about getting it in. Espoma products I find are one of the best to use in the garden. And if it's one of their products aren't carried, I will often just ask, is this something you can get in? Because it's great to use and people like to know what you want and what you want to use. And then with that, I will top dress it with some land and sea compost. I use my compost often too, but my compost right now I have going mostly for my perennial beds where I just was. I top dressed those in my compost. So I've been using this year in my garden beds. So I put on first my raised bed mix and then I put in some garden tone. So the garden tone is that beautiful lighter color stuff you see on top. That's just a way to kind of add a little bit of nutrients to the bed, really start off the garden beds good. And even if I don't top dress my garden beds or mend them like I am with this raised bed mix, I will still add in the garden tone. On top of that, I put that compost, and so I break that up and lay that on as its final layer right over the whole bed. So what I love about this planting medium, you can see how nice it is to plant in. It just is a really nice mix of soil. Now, when I made my raised beds, I did all my own soil, and you'll see that on my post on my website. I did 60% topsoil, 30% of a good organic compost, and then 10% of a soil lightener, which is, I used perlite, which you can see in this raised bed mix. This is perlite also, those little round white spots, those are perlite. And that's just a nice soil lightener to make sure there's good drainage and good aeration. We're gonna start by planting tomatoes. Now last year I caused a little bit of a stir when I posted a reel and it showed how I was taught planting tomatoes, which was digging more of a trench. This is how my grandma did it, my mom did it, and laying the tomatoes slightly sideways and then having it go up at the end. And what that does is tomatoes grow roots all along their stem, and so it's supposed to create a more solid base for them. Some people really do not like that method and claim they won't live at all. Now, my grandma and my mom have a combined experience that would say otherwise, but I understand the thought process behind just wanting to plant them deep. So this year I'm going to show just planting them deep as opposed to laying them over. In the end, both do the same thing. If you don't want to dig as big of hole or as deep as hole, you can plant a tomato sideways in a trench more, or you can plant in a deeper hole, which I'll show you now. So what I do is I use each tile to kind of show me where I'm going to be putting my tomatoes. And beside them, I have basil planted that I started from seed. I don't always companion plant, but I'm planting the basil beside them this year more because I ran out of space. So when I'm getting ready to dig these, you can see I'm going deep this time as opposed to a trench. So you can look up how I've done it before in different years. I am one that thinks whatever works for you, whatever has given you success, go with it, live with it. Now this you can see is probably about a 6-inch right now hole at its deepest part. And why that is because look at these. I started these from seed. They're starting to get tall. They have long stems. So what I want to do is pull them out. Look at all that root growth. That's great. I'm going to pull off their bottom couple leaves here. And I'm going pretty much to where, so we have still a couple of the early leaves that first pop out when the seed is sprouting down here at the bottom. But now it only has the top and we have all this stem. So when we set this down in that hole, do you see how a lot of that stem is going to be covered with soil? It's going to shoot roots though out this whole way, and that will cause it to have a very sturdy start under the ground, which is exactly what you want. So whether you do a deep or you go more sideways like I have in the past, and then at the end just have it come up, either one works. We're all getting to the same point here in the end. It's just there's different methods to do it. So what I do put down in the bottom here is some tomato tone. You know, tomatoes in general, a lot of people are worried about blossom end rot, which that can be a calcium deficiency. So there's a lot of old sayings to put a Tums with it. I know people that do other things. I find if you have healthy soil, if you have soil that you have worked on, that you have added good compost to, used good organic things like tomato tone and other products, that is going to give you healthy tomatoes. So I don't do things like a Tums or anything, but I do make sure I plant them deep, which you can see is what I'm doing. And I do use tomato tone. And that's one of the only 2 things I do. Now what I'm going to make sure to do is put the soil back around it until it starts coming back up, and I'll just move down the line. So I have all these planted. I did put biotone in the hole with the tomato tone. Forgot to show you. But I have that in there too. Now you'll notice I placed the tiles over them right now because I looked at the radar. It looks like we're supposed to get some severe weather tonight, some wind. So I placed the tiles over them to protect them. And honestly, that takes my worry away because the tile can't blow around. So it'll keep that tender tomato seedling safe for a while. Now I was gonna go ahead and plant my peppers. I'm gonna wait. We'll wrap this up tomorrow. I don't have enough tiles to put around all the peppers too, and why plant them when it looks like possibly scary weather tonight? So we'll come back tomorrow, finish up with the peppers, kind of talk about the differences in the two when I'm planting different types of vegetables, and get going. I'm actually excited for rain, so I do hope there is rain. It's the next day, friends, and it's a beautiful day at that. We actually really lucked out last night. That severe weather I was talking about, that dark clouds I was showing, they came in so fast, 60-mile-an-hour winds. Certain areas had really bad hail. We had no real major hail, nothing that did anything, and just had really strong winds, but we had a lot of rain. And honestly, I'm glad for the rain. I feel awful that other people had bad damage, but everything just looks greener. I think the grass grew overnight. I think lots of the shrubs and everything grew. All my tomatoes look wonderful. This is actually a great thing that I split this video because now you can see how 60-mile-an-hour winds, but all these tomatoes, I just uncovered them from the tiles. They look great. Those tiles protected them fully. And you can see here how the tomatoes now can be out in the sun. So that's what I do here. Since I'm in such an open area with lots of wind, I leave the tiles beside them here for a while. And then if I see weather coming or just an extra windy day, I'll cover them up. Otherwise, I let the sun just get to them. And they're all gonna start growing now. And we won't have obviously tomatoes until at the earliest, the very end of July, but usually it's more around August. So it depends what area you live in. Where I live, it takes a while because we can't plant them until later. And then they need a long, warm weather, a lot of that to actually start growing. So now what we're gonna do is the peppers. I've started laying them out. That's the last thing really I have to do in my garden, plus some eggplant, a tomatillo here at the end. But this is my hot pepper bed. And you can see I just took all my seedlings out that I started and I laid them out. So for my peppers, I plant them all. My mom and I split, since my mom's across the road, we split our gardening. So she does all the sweet peppers. I don't love a lot of bell peppers. I like to do a lot of hot peppers, one just to use in cooking, but two to can with. I preserve hot peppers. I love pickled hot peppers. So I do all the hot peppers at my house and I space them all about 18 inches apart. The rows in between them have close to 2 feet, but not quite. I push it a little bit. It's best probably to have at least 24 inches between the rows, 18 inches between each plant. But you can put it closer together if you need to. The important thing is the more light, the more air circulation that a plant has, the more blooms it will have overall and the better production. So if you can give yours space, they're gonna have probably better fruit production. If not, don't worry about it and you're still gonna get some wonderful peppers. That's the important thing, or whatever fruit you are growing. So I have these laid out. You saw yesterday I prepared this bed with that raised bed mix and the compost on top. So it has that perfect texture right on top just to plant in, which is ideal. So now I'm gonna show you just planting all these up, and it's really kind of the same process. In general, I had this bed, I prepared it with some garden tone also that I worked into the top couple inches of the soil. But then when I plant each one, I will do that biotone with them again. Now, I grew all these from seed in cell trays, and you can see they have actually beautiful root production on them. And they're starting to get to the point where they really do want to be planted, which I'm really happy for. Peppers can sometimes be a hit or miss for some people. Honestly, to me, they're super easy to start indoors. You just want to get your timing right. They definitely like grow lights. They like a little bit of that warmth too, I've noticed. But otherwise, I grow these from seed every year and have great luck. So what's nice is when you have a good raised bed mix, look at this. I don't need any type of shovel or anything. I can just open the hole up like this and dig a hole. So I'm planting these not as deep as tomatoes. As opposed to tomatoes, I don't want to plant these way up on their stem. They want to be planted about the depth they are. So I will just put a little bit of this biotone right in the hole, and then I just kind of mix it in always a little bit, just to make sure it's getting with that soil, and then I'll just pop this down in. Now, these are very tender roots, so I will break them up ever so slightly just to make sure that they're encouraged to want to branch out, but I don't go in there and just crumple them all. They're very tender, they're very young, they don't need too much work. And you can see already, I have that all set. Now some people, when they're growing their seedlings, they like to nip back their peppers. I don't do that. I have never seen really the benefit of that. I've tried it on years. To me, it does not have better branching usually. It does not give me necessarily more fruit production. I have plenty of peppers, leaving them as is. Usually I would try to plant them before they want to start going and flowering like this. Sometimes I'll even pick these little flowers off when they first got planted, but honestly, these are small enough. I'm not worried about these. We're gonna have plenty of time here now for them just to sit in the sun and bask in all that heat that's gonna be coming and really start growing. So you can see here, I have a few more to plant, and then we'll move on to some eggplant. And in no time, I have them all planted. Now, I saved one because I wanted to show something. Sometimes when you grow them, like I did, or if you just purchase pepper or tomato or any vegetable plant at a garden center, you're gonna find that there are 2 starts in there. That's a free plant. That does not mean you have to either take them apart and throw one away. Don't plant them together, it will get way too tight. But you can actually, since these roots are so young and tender, you can very easily just pull this apart. So I wanted to go over that and show you how I do it, because it looks like it could be scary. It looks like it could damage the plant, but it doesn't. That's the beauty of it. So let's take it apart and plant 2 plants where you thought you were only gonna have 1. So if you come down to it, I just started, and all I do is gingerly pull the 2 parts away. So I only have 1 hand here I'm working with at a time. But you can see, if you just gingerly start pulling, their roots are 2 separate roots. They're intertwined, but you can easily pull them away separately, and you get a nice root on this one and a nice root structure on this one. So then you can just plant them separately. Now, ideally when I start seeds, usually I would try to thin them. This one obviously I missed, and I let one go, where usually I would have just taken it out and had just 1 in that cell. But it's not that it is that detrimental to allow 2 of them to grow in a cell. After too much time, they would start encroaching on each other. But in this case, they really didn't last that long together like that. So I'm just gonna put it right back down in there. And we're just gonna plant it. And so now we have 2 plants out of that. So one, you're gonna notice here, this is a little bit of debris from last year. I will sometimes leave some of that debris in the garden because it's just gonna compost back into the soil. What you're also probably wondering is, what on earth do you do with all these peppers? Now, I grew up with a large garden. This is what I'm used to, is planting a large garden. And we do it for multiple reasons. We do preserve them. We do can and freeze a lot of things. I also cook with a lot of these for all my videos and all of that. So I actually end up using a lot. So these are all hot peppers. I have 4 in a row of the hot banana pepper. That's a nice yellow, long, hot pepper. And this one, you may remember the recipe I've posted last year for hot pepper mustard. The hot banana pepper is the one I grow specifically for that mustard, and we make quite a bit of it. So I have 4 plants to make sure I get a nice amount. Since I do preserve a lot of things, since my mom preserves a lot of things and we do a lot of that together, we always find that since we have the space, having plenty ready to go allows us to save time in the long run, because when you go to can or go to put together something you want to preserve, if you're able to do bigger batches or more batches at once, in the long run that saves time when all the mess is going in the kitchen. So we like to make sure we have everything we need ready, hopefully have a lot of it, be able to harvest at one time so we can really work in big batches when we're preserving things, and it's just what I'm used to. So obviously I'll share with friends or with my grandma as needed or as they want. My grandma does not like hot peppers, so she won't want any of these, but it's really fun to me to start growing some of these. So I'm gonna run down here and we're gonna quick plant some eggplant and then we'll wrap up. So at the end of my pepper bed, I have some eggplant. Now I've planted in the past 6 or 8 of them. This year I'm doing 4 because sometimes that can just be too much. For this, I love to use in my eggplant parmesan on my website. I love to use it for baba ganoush. I have that recipe on my website. I love eggplant. I love even just to roast them and eat them. I love to fry them and eat them. They're really delicious. And I don't, this is not one I grew up with, but it's so fun now to be able to grow those things that you want to experiment with and try. And it's much the same as any other plant. A little bit of biotone, put it right in the hole. All these I started from seed. So they're just, they're a fun one to grow because you can start trying to find things that you're maybe gonna end up liking that you didn't realize you liked. And I think that's the exciting thing of gardening, is to choose things that excite you, choose things that make you want to go out, check your garden, be excited when something's growing, because that's what's going to really make you into a gardener, and it's going to excite you the most about all of it. So all really I have left here are some tomatillos, which I like to use in salsa and for salsa verde, green salsa. So I'll plant those and then we'll be good to go. I make these planting videos, gardening videos, vegetable videos to show that gardening really does happen for each of us very differently. I have large raised beds. Some people have just containers. Some people have an in-ground gardening. But those principles all apply the same across the board. You want to have your garden in full sun, as much full sun as you can have, depending on your space. Peppers, tomatoes want full sun. They want the heat of summer. If you live in extra hot climates, you sometimes don't grow tomatoes over the middle of summer, but grow them towards the end when you're going more into fall. It all depends what your climate is, and knowing those little differences and nuances is what makes you a gardener. It's what makes you someone that learns over time, and that's what it's all about. So having the healthy soil for me has always been the most beneficial. So adding the things like garden tone, adding good compost. Hopefully you can make it yourself. If not, you can get good organic compost. Making sure your soil is at its best ecosystem. That's what's going to create really healthy plants and just in the long run give you more production. So that's what I hope you see from this. I hope you share these videos around so other people can get excited about gardening too, whether it's perennial gardening like we started with or vegetable gardening like we ended with. And check my website, wyseguy.com. That's where I have the recipes that I mentioned, but also so many of the things I use and show how I preserve or can or bake or cook. It's on my website. So until then, get out there, garden, put something in a pot, make yourself feel a little bit good and healthy. You're growing life. That's the best part.